We often think of the nation state as a static and fixed idea, something that will always be there forever. So while human beings like me and you may come and go, the nation, our nation, is a permanent structure. The nation is our North Star. The nation is eternal.
Or is it? We only have to go back to the middle of the 20th century to discover just how many of these national entities are far more modern than we might imagine. And you learn just how many of them were created, not by naturally occurring events, but rather by people with rulers and pens. Many people around the world are not living in naturally occurring populations or groups, but rather inhabiting pieces of land imposed on them artificially. North Korea and South Korea, India and Pakistan, Israel and Gaza, to name but a few.
And it was that last one that has seen the world struggling to come to terms with a series of devastating atrocities. The current conflict has a long and documented history, and we here at The Glitch welcome your thoughts on that. But whatever might be said of the past, recent events have shocked many. We quite simply never thought such a thing would be possible. We here at The Glitch, we want to know what this conflict and the tragic loss of life means for security here on the Korean Peninsula. Michelle?
So where does that leave us here in Seoul, Busan, Daegu, or Gangwon-do? I'm Michelle.
And I'm David.
And it's time to talk security.
When you live next door to North Korea, the news is always filled with missile launches, military parades, and even sometimes nuclear tests. Now, while many in the capital city and South Korea more broadly have become somewhat numb to these events, the current South Korean government has taken a much stronger approach than its predecessors.
So instead of the handshakes and selfies of yesterday under President Yoon Suk-yeol, Seoul has declared North Korea's continued advancements of its nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction capabilities, as well as the potential of preemptive nuclear strikes as the country's most pressing security issue.
And then there's the relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang. Chairman Kim Jong-un recently embarked on a rather rare trip to Russia where he met with President Putin. While the two were together, they agreed on a new arms deal as well as military cooperation. Since then, a lot of satellite footage has picked up increased movement across the Russian and North Korean border, with hundreds of trains going back and forth. Now, we have no idea what's actually inside those trains, but we can probably guess it's going to be something more than flowers.
Adding to the mix is the presence of Beijing. Chairman Xi Jinping has described President Putin as one of his best friends. The two frequently celebrate each other's birthdays, and they have met over 40 times in the past 10 years.
In response, President Yoon Suk-yeol and his team have publicly declared their intent to strengthen their military and political alliance with both Washington and Tokyo. This has meant not only singing American Pie in the White House with President Biden and attending the Trilateral Summit at Camp David, it also means coming closer together with Japan. Now, this is a very important issue because relationships between Korea and Japan have a very long, complex, and turbulent history. In coming together, these two nations are using the 1998 agreement signed by President Kim Dae-jung and Kaiser Ibuchi as the basis for this renewed cooperation between the two.
In an address to the nation earlier this year, the president said, "Those countries that share the universal values of freedom, human rights, and the rule of law are banding together through their economies and industries. This solidarity based on these universal values is the most strategic choice in the current diplomatic landscape. And it's putting its money where its mouth is. By developing and exporting advanced weapon systems, Korea has become a defense industry powerhouse. In 2022, it exported $17.3 billion worth of defense equipment, an increase of nearly 500% on previous years."
This all sounds like Korea is incredibly safe and has really nothing to fear. And while life may go on and the coffee shops are as busy as ever, recent events around the world and the tragedies that have unfolded remind us that no matter how strong we think we are or how safe we think we might be, we should never take our security for granted.
So, just how safe is Korea? Let's ask an expert.
Okay, come with me and let's go and find an expert. So the academic, author, and former National Foreign Policy Advisor, Dr. Victor Cha, recently testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee for Asia and the Pacific. Now, he had this to say about how recent global events are affecting security on the Korean Peninsula, but also how this is contributing towards the trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. He also had some things to say about North Korea.
consider South Korean lethal assistance to Ukraine. South Korean President Yoon has stated that North Korea's provision of lethal assistance to Russia is a direct threat to South Korea's security. South Korea thus far has provided humanitarian assistance and indirect lethal support through third parties like Poland and the United States. And there are some who might argue that this new development in DPRK-Russia cooperation is a response to the Camp David summit. I don't believe that to be the case. This concatenation of developments in the region, however, is precipitating an arms race in Asia, but this is not at the initiative of the United States or its allies. China's massive nuclear buildup, North Korea's drive to become a nuclear weapon state the size of France, and most of all, Russia's war in Europe have fundamentally changed the security environment in the region and on the peninsula in ways that have compelled countries who support the peaceful status quo to respond.
World leaders often find themselves trying to manage two very different forces in the field of international relations. On the one hand, it is vital that they maintain good relations with other nations because this is vital for economic prosperity and global stability. This will increase trade partnerships, economic cooperation, and all of this in the long-term benefits a nation's economic success.
On the other hand, leaders are also confronted with the challenge of addressing foreign policies and actions that they fundamentally might disagree with, like human rights violations, territorial disputes, and controversial military interventions.
The real difficulty in all of this lies in either following your nation's interests and values or criticizing the actions of another nation that might go against these principles. The consequences of these decisions that get made can have far-reaching implications both domestically and internationally. The South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol knows this only too well. As global conflicts continue to emerge, South Korea is all too cognizant of the political division amongst its regional partners, and it also knows about what consequences might happen if and when it chooses to take sides.
Although South Korea strongly favors a peaceful resolution to this crisis and have criticized Hamas's actions, President Yoon and his team are also concerned about the potential impact this might have on Korean trade and national economy. Over the past few years, South Korea has named the Middle East as a lucrative venue for international expansion of its domestic industries. In 2022, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia were South Korea's leading trading partners in the region, with Saudi Arabia alone representing nearly 4% of South Korea's global imports, which is equivalent to almost $24 billion. President Yoon also just recently returned from a 6-day visit to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, where he reportedly signed 63 MOUs worth $20.2 billion.
Money talks and money silences. So when world leaders face the decision between their economy and values, they are encountering a dilemma that is as old as time. And that's why a little bit of history can help us better understand the modern world. In the 1970s and the 1980s, South Korean companies won and built a huge number of projects in the Middle East, and this was carried out by almost 1 million South Korean workers. This demonstrated South Korea's growing need for oil, as well as the importance for the region. The government of the time under President Park Chung-hee called this the Middle East boom. And then decades later, his daughter and later president of South Korea, Park Geun-hye, she tried to initiate what was called the second Middle East boom.
This also had a diplomatic angle to it. While South Korea and Israel established their diplomatic relations all the way back in 1962, South Korea didn't have an ambassador there until the 1990s, with Seoul fearing that this might endanger its lucrative projects in the region. And when Washington asked South Korea to send military forces to assist in the 1991 Gulf War and the 2003 Iraq invasion, as well as send naval forces to the Strait of Hormuz in January 2020, South Korea feared that its military involvement might be construed negatively by the countries in the region and endanger its trade. For South Korea, both then and now, there has always been a desire to project its economic and soft power rather than its military power, which might lead to clashes and harm its interests in the Middle East.
Pyongyang has a role to play in this story too. Israel sees North Korea as a security threat because of its possible sale of conventional and non-conventional weapons to the Middle East. The government in Israel is also concerned by the global community's failure to stop North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Now, remember those stories about President Yoon singing in the White House? This is really important because despite initiating diplomatic relations in 1962, no South Korean president or PM has visited Israel unofficial business since then. And this is rather unusual because the leaders of other Asian states such as China and Japan, they've all visited there. And we also just heard from Michelle about President Yoon visiting the Middle East states of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This tells us that for South Korea, the region is important, politics are important, and it's also trying to look after its own interests.
Politicians are always focused on money and diplomatic relations, but there's one thing that they're always keenly aware of, and that's public opinion. University students here in Seoul are connected to the world and they are opinionated. They're also attending classes with people from all over the world, including those from the Middle East and those directly affected by the situation. This has meant that a wide range of opinions has been reaching all across campuses and social media. Some condemning the actions of Hamas, some speaking in support of the plight of the Palestinian people. The Workers' Solidarity Youth Group also demonstrated in calling for an end to Israel's military action, as well as waving pro-Palestinian messages. This speaks to the wonderful democracy that Korea has created and allowing for a variety of perspectives to be heard.
The situation in the Middle East has presented a huge challenge to South Korea, asking it to balance its economy, national interest, public opinion, and even possible military engagement. The president and his team are confronted with the challenge of maximizing the country's security while also caring about the economy, and they have to do this in an ever-changing and incredibly complex geopolitical situation. And while sometimes these events may seem very far away from the world of Seoul, the constant threat of North Korea, its relationship with Russia, and also the presence of China means that South Korean security should never be taken for granted. Security is a fundamental human need, and that resonates deeply inside of us all psychologically. And that's why these relationships and managing them is so important for the people of this country, the people of this world, and you and me.
Whoever you are and wherever you are and whatever you may believe in, we here at Asian Society Korea hope that you too can experience a sense of security. And we would love to hear your opinions about this. Reach out, show trust, and join the conversation here on The Glitch.